Okay, so let's try this one and start again. If I remember to push the go live button, it does actually help.
Mm-hmm.
Good evening, folks. Sorry about that. It's been a long Sunday. I'm joined by Jim and Steve, and we are talking about the uh, one of the original big three sci-fi authors, Robert Heinlein. Um, Most well known these days, probably especially within certain genres and spheres for Starship Troopers.
Yes.
Hence the service guarantee citizenship at the bottom there. But he also wrote a lot of other things. He wrote hard science fiction. Um, he wrote. He kind of half invented the hippie movement with Stranger in a Strange Land.
Yeah.
He wrote young, what I suppose what you call young, these days we call young adult literature, like Have Spacesuit Will Travel, The Star Beast, Space Cadet, and a variety of other ones like that. And he wrote long term history. He started off at some point. He actually wrote out on a large sheet of paper a timeline of the history of the future, which is why I've titled this "The History of the Future." He's sort of semi-credited with coming up with that whole idea. He wrote books, and he wrote a third, maybe, of his entire output. All fits everything from massive, great, thick novels like Number of the Beast, through to very short novellas and short fiction, short stories. I think the first one he wrote and published was, forget the name, basically, future. Um, Specifically, he could tell when you were going to die. And at the end of it, spoilers, but it's about 70 years old, this book. The life insurance companies kill him, or because he's costing them money. But it turns out that he'd already predicted he was going to be killed then anyway. And I think that was the very first novel or novella he wrote or had published.
Yeah, I think so too. But what stands out for me when it comes to Heinlein is, especially when we're talking about Starship Troopers, what is it? The guy that directed the film,
Oh, Verhoeven.
Verhoeven, yeah, he was so shocked and appalled two chapters into Starship Troopers. They said, I don't want to read anything more of this. He just chucked it to one of his assistants.
Yeah.
To tell him a little bit about what the rest of the book was about. And then he made it up. But Heinlein wasn't that fixated with just one type of governance.
No.
In Starship Troopers, yes, it is fascism. But it's not necessarily fascism. But when you go to Moon is a Harsh Mistress, it's definitely communism. And he explored a lot of the books with many types of governance and actually explored the idea, what would a society like this look like? How would it work? How would it function? Can you actually build a story around a society that works this way?
Right.
And he's done brilliantly in almost all of them.
Yeah, well, I always remember this discussion, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which is basically the American Revolution. It's very cleverly done. It exposes, in some ways, the cynicism of politicians, because the basic story is the Moon is a penal colony and they have a revolution. So it's basically 1776 on the Moon, because obviously he's an American. But what they cleverly do is, at one point, they're going round the earth trying to get backing for their de facto revolution government. And they go in various places, and in various places, they stress that certain important points happened on important days in that nation's history. And there's one or two really interesting bits I remember where you've got the professor, the old professor of politics, is talking and he's saying, examining various different sorts, as you say, Jim, of governments. He said, I mean, I can't remember the details, but things like, for example, should a politician have a certain level of income so that they're not incumbent on vested interests to pay for them, which of course is a problem we have in a lot of systems now. And the other one I remember, he says, should it take a 2/3 vote to pass a law? Because if 2/3, you can't convince 2/3 of the people that it's a good law, it's probably not a good law. And
exactly.
And if
for me, it stands out more. I mean, you connected to the American Revolution.
Yeah,
I connected more to the unionizations and the comrade and the socialism, and everybody should have it equal, and nobody should be paid too much, and there should be a balance. And
there's definitely an element of socialism, if not communism, in it, but it works. In a way, it works. One of the things I think that runs through a lot of Heinlein's work, and I've been mentioned, there was Ridley Scott a few years ago now. He did a series of documentaries called Prophets of Science Fiction, and Heinlein was one of them. I think Clark was on it.
Well, you would get Clark, Philip K. Dick, the usual suspect, Asimov.
Yeah. But one of the things he pointed out is that one of the things that Heinlein would not idealize, a lot of his heroes tend to be well-rounded Renaissance man. I mean, obviously, a lot of his attitudes are based in when he was born and when he was writing in the sort of 30s to the early 50s post-war.
If I'm wrong, but didn't Heinlein have pretty much a similar history to that of Tolkien? Served in World War, so a lot of comrades and everything get hurt, and
I don't think he did, because I think he was invalided out of the Navy, the US Navy, before World War II. I'm not sure he served in World War One. But because I always used to think, because he was ex-Navy, but I always used to think he'd been in World War II, but no, he actually wasn't in World War II. He'd been invalided out, I think, before World War II. But he wrote, I think Starship Troopers, for example, he wrote because he was very, very disgusted with the, it's okay, PJ might not be able to join us tonight. He's got some other things on, unfortunately. That he wrote Starship Troopers partly in response to the anti-nuclear movement. And a lot of these things, he was quite what we would now call right-wing, I think, quite conservative.
Anyone born before 2016 is extreme right-wing, you know that.
Yeah, well, yeah. But I mean, he was what we would call not extreme, but he was very definitely. I mean, especially even in the American politics sense, which tends to be more one side, I think, than European politics does. But yeah, he was, very, very patriotic. I mean, that's the thing. What always irritates me when people complain about Starship Troopers. Well, first read the book. Don't go by the film. But I mean, he pushes a lot of his characters. He pushes self-reliance. He pushes responsibility. He pushes putting others ahead of yourself. He pushes, on a lot of the themes, especially in Starship Troopers is the best example of it. But in a lot of the others as well, is that it's responsibility, it's self-reliance. You've been able to do things on your own. I mean, you think definitely his most frequent character is Lazarus Long, or Woodrow Wilson Smith, as he's born, and he's protagonist in a lot of the Future History series because he's the product of a breeding program, basically. But he is, what they do is the basic of Howard families. They get people, and it's not forced marriage, but they are, evening Jacob, but they are encouraged to. They're given certain families that they're encouraged to get involved with and see if anything happens, because what they're doing is these are people whose parents and grandparents died quite old. And it's very well described, but Lazarus Long Woody is an anomaly. I mean, I think the last time we see him is about 2,000 years old.
What book does this start in?
Oh, I'm not sure. It's Methuselah's Children is the one I think that starts a lot of the history off. The most one I know is Time Enough for Love is the one that's I think has got most of it in there. But he appears in other bits, and some of his characters I think appear in short stories and so on over that one. He ends up that I think the last time I think the last one Lazarus is in A Cat Who Walks Through Walls. Because Heinlein got a little bit. He had some interesting, some odd ideas, I think it's fair to say. I mean, I remember there's one bit in Time Enough for Love. Time Enough for Love is several short stories. A thick book, but it's short story. It's a lot of several short stories, novellas with linking arc. But there's one bit in that where he's actually discussing biology, genetics, and morals. Because I suspect that genetics was probably coming about under the study of genetics, and I suspect this was possibly sometime around when DNA was discovered, etc. And he's got an interesting, shall we say, thing where he's talking about it's basically he's got his two twins and sort of a pair of twins, boy and girl, and he's saying that if you can read genetic charts, it was obviously a lot more advanced. He was looking ahead to what the technology will be able to do. You can see that it's possible that a brother and sister or close relations may be more genetically viable than people who are not related that closely but have other genetic things which might impinge on each other. That's just saying, some ideas that probably would make a lot of people think, but they make you think.
Yeah, that was literally his concept around the whole thing, and I think you touched a little bit on it in the beginning of that, shall we say, rant or whatever you want to call it. It is something that I didn't even reflect upon until just now. It's self-reliability.
Yes.
All the heroes, all the characters he wrote about, they were self-sufficient. They weren't that they needed others to help them with everything, or they were superheroes on their own. They were just clever, and it was like, hey, here's a problem. You have a spacesuit. You won it off a radio show.
Yes.
Radio show raffle.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you got the spacesuit. You don't got your rockets. You have nothing. What do you use a spacesuit for?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, so that thing is that probably in reality, his heroes were too good to be true. I mean, very few people are going to be that skilled in all things. But his idea was that you should have a broad base of knowledge.
I will count that slightly.
Yeah, sure.
With my dad being born 1932. never went to college or anything higher than that. Just 6 years of general education. Trigonometry, he could do that in his head. He didn't need rulers or anything. If a problem came before him, he just dismantled it into maybe 100 pieces. I need to solve these 100 problems to solve that one big problem.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that is a characteristic of this era. People were supposed to not just go, I don't know how to do this, I give up. I mean, today it's too easy to just go, I don't know how to do this. Let me sit on Google for 3 days and YouTube for the next week.
Yeah.
And then do nothing.
I mean, I think to be fair and to be honest, nowadays there are a lot more specializations to specialize in than there were 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago when our parents were born.
My dad was 76 the first time he built his own computer.
Wow.
Prior to that, he had refused to touch computers at all.
Well, it's fun. I mean, as I said, I didn't say no like that. But I said, I think it's something to strive for, but it's perhaps not the much. It's a little bit unrealistic to expect people to have that broader base of skills these days. But I mean, a lot of his stuff was sort of frontier level ideas, or he came up with. He was one of the first. I mean, the Number of the Beast I've got on there is one of his later books, but it comes up with the idea of alternate timelines, alternate histories, and the very end is a little. It goes very. I'm not saying necessarily weird, but I mean, the very end you have a cross universe, cross timeline meeting in which two versions of Robert Heinlein are both there in the book. Sorry, She-Hulk didn't do anything original. But I mean, one of the things I have, going back to what Stephen and I were talking about last time, there's a bit in there, for example, where the basic premise is idea that we can go sideways in time as well as forward backwards in time. And sideways in time is basically you jump. I mean, think sliders or something like that. But there's one, for example, where they're approached. Sorry, I can see I went dead there for a second. One there. Hey, Mounted to Elysium. Excellent. Glad you could join us, mate. And there's one bit in Number of the Beast where they are challenged by Lensman Smith of the Galactic Patrol. And one of the characters turns around and says, check with Mentor, he'll know all about us, because they've read the Lensman books. The idea they've got is that even the fictional universes are in some way somehow real, so they jump into various fictional universes, including Oz. So it's not just science fictional universes. Some very clever ideas, but they do tend to go slightly. I think towards the end of his life, some of his ideas did get a little bit out there.
Yeah, I noticed that more of his interesting science fiction is written much later on in his life. I mean, just by the titles alone, To Sail Beyond the Sunset, The Cat Who Walks Through Walls, A Comedy of Justice. These are obviously much more highbrow.
Yeah, Job Comedy of Justice. Job is a really, really, let's just say, it's a really interesting idea. That, I mean, that one, it posits very basically that there are literally layers of reality. So you've got it's basically based on Job from the Bible, but it turns out to be a different reason. And without spoiling anything too much, the way they look at it, you've got levels of reality, and the god of our universe is a lower level manager in a hierarchy that goes other levels, other planes and levels of existence. Yeah. I can't remember, because you've got I think you've got Number of the Beast, the Number of the Beast, The Cat Who Walks the Walls, and To Sail Beyond Sunset are all somewhat linked, because The Cat Who Walks the Walls, I think, brings in, they jump into the, or they bring into the Moon is a Harsh Mistress universe. So they go into that one. The Cat Who To Sail Beyond Sunset is, that gets a little bit Woody, Lazarus Long goes back to his childhood, and let's say there's a little bit of Oedipus in there. That's there's some bits of that do sort of make you go a little bit. But again, they're still really, really good ideas.
I mean, he wasn't holding his punches, exploring these ideas either. And this is why he's got flagged for so many things. Like, he's a fascist, he's a Nazi, he's a socialist, he's communist, he's Democrat.
He's a science fiction writer. So.
Yeah, and the ability to build the universe and stay consistent to it. It's like, these are the harsh rules that are set down. If this is a fascist society, this is how it would be run. And you can tell even his heroes are trying to break from it in one way or another. And that's probably one of the reasons I think Heinlein is the one that rose up really high for me. I love the others, Philip K. Dick, Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, what's that Raymond fella that wrote Flash stuff and everything?
Ray Bradbury.
I don't think the Raymond did the Flash stuff, but he did similar ones like Prince of Mars.
Bowers.
Yes.
Sorry, Bowers.
But you had the very early Flash Gordon books as well. It's like interestingly written universes, but other than Philip K. Dick and maybe Arthur C. Clarke, Heinlein was really the only one daring to explore ideas beyond the set concept. Maybe, and I'm not too familiar with this author, but Ursula K. Le Guin.
Yeah.
She did universes where literally the World Economic Forum, you own nothing and you'll be happy.
Yeah.
But she did it in great explorative ways, showing the faults, the upsides, the downsides. You'll have this, but you will not have these. You do not have that support, but you may get support on this side.
Well, I mean, he also come up with some very, very good hard sci-fi. I mean, he had some. I don't know much about his personal life, but he did have some ideas of regarding sex and sexuality and families. I mean, the Moon is a Harsh Mistress, for example, it's got a fantastic idea. They come up with ideas for families which aren't just a nuclear family, but they work. I mean, the way he has a serial family where you get several husbands and wives, and the family just goes on and on.
Right.
You know, as you said, I mean, he comes up with idea. I mean, the Notebooks of Lazarus Long he's on Notes of Lazarus Long. Lazarus Long, I think, is pretty much Heinlein's self-insert, in effect. There's a lot, because if you get hold of those ones, and there's a lot of them, a couple of sets in, certainly in my copy of Time Enough for Love, but little short thoughts like, remember your enemy, remember your enemy is not an evil eye. He's not an evil person in his own eye. Your enemy is not an evil person in his own eyes. Remember this, and you can deal with him. If you can't, it makes it easy to kill him without. It makes it, if you have to kill him, you can do so dispassionately. Without getting passionate about it.
Right.
Or things like, the family. The most important thing about the family is there for the sole purpose of making sure that children are raised safely. And this sort of little idea, she's got a lot of these running through it. But Time for the Stars is one of the ones I read as a kid. And Time for the Stars, it's about a pair of twins. And basically they turn out to be low-level telepathic. And what they do is, the basic story is, one of them goes off on a spaceship with others, exploring the universe. And it's in some ways it's similar to the Bobbyverse that PJ put us onto, where it's the time travel is relativistic. So what you get is your main hero, the youngster on the spaceship, he's a young adult. He's not kidnapped and sent off as a 12-year-old, but when they come out of hibernation, when they come out of really high-speed travel, close to light speed, he can telepathically communicate with his brother. But the story is, he doesn't age very much, and his brother ages. So I say again, it's a kid, so it teaches you about relativity. It teaches you about time dilation. They come up against several planets. They come back, and there is a resolution there. Between the brothers and so on, but again, another sort of comment that he comes up with really, really well. The Star Beast, I think, is one of the first Heinleins I ever read, and certainly was my favorite as a kid. It's about a kid who has a monster pet, but they end up contacting there's some couple of best pieces, but they end up contacting the monsters or the aliens people, and it turns out that this alien is actually, I think he's actually a she, for starters, and is very important. But they've been going. It's been passed on from father to son, and her attitude is she's been raising these people. She's been raising these kids. So it turns it around. Again, idea of something very long-lived. And again, within young adult science fiction, so introducing really interesting concepts to young adults.
PJ mentions his favorite was Have Spacesuit Will Travel. Now, I'm not familiar with that one. What is actually going on in that story?
Some other thing. That's the one Jim was speaking about earlier. There's, I haven't read it in a while, but basically there's our hero wins a spacesuit. And he puts it on and he tries it and he fixes it up and he uses the radio and he contacts, I think PJ, you'll have to correct me if I'm remembering these things because it's a long time already, but he contacts a young girl who's been kidnapped by aliens, I think.
Okay.
And they end up but he ends up with they're contacted by the mother thing character called she's a vegan and she's very maternal, and she's basically the space police effectively. It's again, it's a young adult novel, so it's quite relatively simplistic storytelling in some of those terms. But again, it's quite a famous. They have adventures where they're on the run from the kidnappers and the bad guys and this sort of thing. Yeah, again, that's one of mine. I read as a kid. A lot of these are one-offs. Volcano of Mars, Farmer in the Sky, where they end. I think Farmer in the Sky is one where they end up going through a wormhole to another planet, and a lot of these stories, as I said, I mean, they are effectively their frontier colonization.
Yeah, Pee-wee.
Yeah,
PJ was saying
yeah.
Pee-wee is a young girl, and the mother thing is an alien conqueror. Or an alien creature.
I'm going to have to go back and reread that now. Yeah, the hero, Kip is our hero. All right, yes, yep. Thanks. So again, it's very the competent man sort of thing. So he gets to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have to reread a lot of these. I put Starship Troopers on my Kindle the other day to read.
Yeah, I'm about like an hour away from finishing it for the second time in the last couple of weeks.
I had a friend long time ago. I used to work at the airport who was also a big science fiction Heinlein fan, and he reckoned that he thought what Heinlein might have been, because if anybody's not, but I mean, there are a lot of differences between the film and the book. A lot of differences.
Yeah, between Starship Troopers is an entirely different story.
There are also a lot of similarities in the structure, and especially in that it does not end. It ends open-ended. And my friend used to say he actually reckoned that that Heinlein, what Heinlein would have intended to do would have been to have the hero, to have Johnny Rico go to boot camp for the Navy and end up as a Sky Marshal, because in the book, in order to go for Sky Marshal, which we saw Sky Marshal in the film as well, the senior commander, you had to have been both military and both Army and Navy. So you had to have done both, and you had to literally both work the same way. Everybody starts off as a grunt and you get trained up. And as you see in the film, a lot of that is similar to the book. You get picked up and you go and you go through the ranks. And you go. Another fascinating thing is you look at it, the history, and he has this thing in Starship Troopers, which again I think is very Heinlein, is very reactionary to what he saw, I think, as a lot of what's the best way to put it? Even more so now, but certainly I think he was sort of coming in was selfishness, was lack of willingness to help others. Where he has a whole thing called History and Moral Philosophy, and this is the one. This is what you see in the film. Was the HMP course are the ones. I think that's the only lessons you see in the film. When you've got Ratchak, for example, asking about what's the difference between a civilian and a citizen, and you see in the lessons, all those lessons. That's all HMP, History and Moral Philosophy. It's not a passable course. It's a nothing course for high school, but it has to be taught by a veteran. In the book, a veteran, it's service. In the service, service means you put yourself ahead of. Sorry, you put society ahead of yourself. It's not just military, and this is one thing that everybody gets in the film. The film is quite militaristic. The book is service, not military service.
Right.
But when he becomes an officer, he goes to an officer to OCS school, and he has to take history and military philosophy, and he has to pass it. And if he doesn't pass it, not only the way they put it is, not only does they will he not get to be an officer, and I'll question if he should be in the mobile infantry at all. You know, when you get to officer level, it becomes a very different, same lessons, but very different emphasis on them, because it's the same thing. It's history and morals, and again, I think that's something which comes through very much through Heinlein's attitudes and through his work. Is another thing that's in there. He's having the right attitude, the right moral attitude. You know, I mean, he's Starship Troopers is probably the one book that everyone knows, best will know.
Yeah, ironically, they know it, but they don't know it.
Yeah,
they know it through the film or even through the animated series. More.
Oh yeah, well, the animated series was, I think, was actually the best. Is the best version of Starship Troopers. It's not to the book, but it's the best version. It's got things in it. I would recommend anybody who has watched Starship Troopers, the film, to do 3 things. Go and read Starship Troopers, the book. Go and read Joe Haldeman's The Forever War, the first book in the Forever War. Very different take on a similar idea. Go and read The Moon is a Harsh Mistress if the politics interests you, because The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, completely unconnected. But again, it's got a lot of interesting concepts, makes you think about politics and history. But yeah, they've got these things, and I think that's something that goes through. I said goes through a lot of Heinlein's work.
Yeah, there's one sci-fi. It's a pair of short stories. It's called Waldo and Magic Incorporated.
Yes. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, he invented it.
Absolutely fantastic concept in there in Magic Incorporated is that he includes magic as a science fiction concept in this invention process of what turns out to be basically a science-oriented and actually functioning broomstick.
Yeah, it's a long time since I've read those, but I must admit, Waldo, he literally I mean, it's just you got a lot of these. Some of these early science fiction, they quite literally invented things. Arthur C. Clarke literally invented the communication satellite. He came up with the idea for the communication because he was a radio operator, radio engineer. He came up with the idea for the communication satellite long before it actually came into existence. Heinlein came up with the idea of Waldo's. The you know, if you've ever seen if it's perhaps a term that's not used so much these days, but if you've ever used a litter picker, right? Waldo is a very weak. He has to live in zero gravity because he's very weak. But he comes up with this idea of manipulating arms.
Yes.
So if you've ever done anything from, you know, sort of a fair thing where you manipulate the grabber that picks up sweets, but especially through to the things you sort of see in science movies where you've got them using the handles to open chemicals or to do nuclear reactors.
Yeah, I think the historical reference goes directly to the arm on the space shuttle. The mechanical arm on the space shuttle. Yeah. They refer to it as a Waldo.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they were called. They were originally called Waldos because the first appearance was in Waldo. No, in other words, they're named after the character in Heinlein's short story.
Right.
Because he came up all the way through to the telepresence of now, you know. I mean, the extreme version of that, I suppose, really is sitting in an air-conditioned office somewhere in California, using a drone to bomb people in Afghanistan. That, I suppose, is the ultimate extension of that. Is your remote
manipulation.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean that's something. I'm glad you mentioned that one. I hadn't even thought about that. But yeah, that is again ideas that's something that he came up with.
Now, let's get into the other one that is like a very obscure kind of storyline by Heinlein, and that is Stranger in a Strange Land. Now, that's 1961. This is already well into his career through the 40s and 50s. At this point, he's writing as Robert Heinlein for Robert Heinlein audiences.
Yeah. It's probably his biggest book. Yeah, I haven't read that in a very long time. It's one of the books I only ever read once, but yeah, that's interesting. You wanna explain it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably about as familiar with it as you are at this point, maybe once or twice. But the narrative basically goes that a human comes to Earth in early adulthood after being born on the planet Mars and raised by Martians, explores his interactions and eventual transformation of the Terran culture. It's basically this child has been indoctrinated by a Martian culture, and he's bringing that Martian culture to Earth as almost like a messiah, because he has extraordinary abilities. He has something they call grokking, I think it's called.
Yep, which is the ability to understand something, to look at it and understand something. It's very much, I think it's very much cult. But as you say, a cult that spreads.
This is also where I wanted to jump in a
yeah,
bit
go
on
on,
that.
sure.
It is Stranger in a Strange Land. For those that have read it, this will make sense. But for me, it's a hard book to grok.
Yes. Yeah, it is.
It has nuances upon nuances. It's like layers on top of layers. And just like you described, Stephen, it has so many facets to it. And it is a stranger coming into the society. And because he's so fresh to everything, the way he deals with troubles and all of that stuff, he becomes literally the Messiah.
Well said. I mean, I believe that was, I seem to recall that was, they were talking about that in the Prophets of Science Fiction, which they're all available on YouTube, I think, folks. If you want to look them up, with say by Ridley Scott, really good film, really good series. Sorry, yeah, and
well, none of us would have admitted to be sailing the seven seas. I believe there are also on YouTube available the 100, top 100. I'm not sure if it's top 100 or the 100 greatest sci-fi books ever written in audiobook format.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff is available on YouTube. As I said, I mean, I saw these things years ago on TV, but I discovered them on YouTube. But there's only time I think that he's then he writes Stranger in a Strange Land, and then he finds a load of hippies turning up on his lawn, wanting to learn from him. Which Heinlein was not that.
What I get from it, he was definitely not a hippie, but he had definitely sympathies for what they wanted.
Yeah, but I think he was not impressed with all these hippies turning up. I think that's one of the things I think that led into Starship Troopers. Which everything. Do you know what? It's amazing. I don't know if it's just me. It's probably just my weird brain, but so many things these days come back to Heinlein and Starship Troopers. And the I mean, one of the things he comes back with is he looks back and he refers to the late 20th century as the crazy years. I think he was a couple of decades out, But I mean, one of the things he comes up with is again a lot of stuff from the book rather than the film. But he comes up with is this idea of corporal punishment, and it's public corporal punishment because it's embarrassing as well as make you get the point. And as well, but it comes back and they're explaining about this idea of one of the things I really love is just to show his mindset is the phrase juvenile delinquent is an oxymoron, because by definition a juvenile is not old enough for their brain to have developed enough to understand their duty, for want of a better phrase, to understand what's wrong. And therefore they can't be delinquent, because you can't be delinquent in something you don't understand what you're doing in the first place. You can't be expected to live up to standards you cannot understand. You have not developed enough to understand. But they're talking about, and he's saying about punishment for kids. The punishment that the kids for punishment. Kids' names were never allowed to be. I mean, he's writing this in what 1959, 1960, I think. Starship Troopers.
Yeah.
And he's come out and he's saying. I mean, he's pointing out the system again. Obviously, a more American system than a British system or European, because obviously he's an American and he knows he's writing the American system. But I mean, we've got a lot of the same things. But he's saying these things you can have kids go through, and they're never really punished. They're never really told off anything. And then when they turn 18, they do something and they're on death row because they've never been brought up to
understand that their actions have consequences.
Exactly. Which is why I think they've got which is why I say I think there's so many different things which is appropriate. That's what I mean. I just think his crazy years was 20, 30 years out of date, too early. You just got to look around the world around us today.
Yeah, if you consider some of the things he was talking about just in Starship Troopers alone, about personal responsibility and ethical responsibility and political responsibility. It's funny how many of those things are being openly shunned nowadays. Like, you don't have personal responsibility over anything. And how dare you even ask, and so on and so forth.
Which I think is such a wrong thing, because, I understand that most of democracy is rigged against you. Take the United States, for example. You only have two choices.
Right.
You don't really have the democracy in that sense. You get one or the other.
Yeah.
And you have to be happy with it. That's probably why Churchill said that democracy is probably the worst system we've had, except for all the others we've already tried.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and again, as you said, this is the thing. One of the things, again, that Heinlein expands in most of his books is personal responsibility is I think these days would perhaps be called libertarian idea. You're responsible for doing this. I mean, there's things like one, and I want to think that Moon is a harsh mistress. I don't know how well known he is now, but I will put in there. He comes up with the idea of Tanstaffel. I'm gonna have to think this through.
So what is this again?
Right, Tanstaffel. They've actually put it on the moon thing, but what it actually stands for is there ain't no such thing as a free lunch.
Oh wow! Okay,
right? But the idea is, I mean, it's true. The idea is, okay, nothing is free. Somewhere along the line, you pay for it. If someone takes you to dinner, if a businessman takes you to lunch, they want something in return. They're doing it. That's kind of thing.
I have a little bit of a harsher restriction to that, but because when you're describing,
not SAS, the next version there.
Well, yeah, but because what you're describing is, yes, someone working in marketing, even though I have like an entire law book on bribery and this is how you behave appropriately in the company and everything, smacked over my head every year.
Yeah, but I mean, because
it is still there is no such thing as something that is free.
Yeah,
there is always someone that has to pay, and we're starting to see that now with the I wouldn't say pop culture. This is we're classic pop culture. We're the original ones. And we see all these companies that bought all these titles because, hey, there is 100 million people that read Lord of the Rings. It's literally the second best-selling book next to the Bible. Yeah. And the Bible was literally given away for free, but they counted it still as one sell.
Yeah.
But all the comic books, everything from Iron Man to Thor to Wolverine, Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, all of them, they bought the rights to them, but they couldn't bring stuff in. And it is coming now from the consumer level. We'll pay for it if you give us something good to watch.
Well, I mean, the thing is, he when he came up with this idea, I mean, for a while, like, again, Tan Stafford was a word you would sometimes hear, was again entered culture for a while because of the book. But I mean, it's not even a case of, it wasn't even suggesting it's corruption or anything like that. As he said, it's reality. If someone, the example that, not being dishonest or anything, if a businessman takes you out for lunch, he's going to want to make a pitch.
He wants something from you.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing hidden about it. Just that's the way the world works. I mean, we say that in this country, that one of the big things we have between us and the Americans is the National Health Service. We don't have free health care.
We pay for it constantly.
We pay for the tax for it,
right.
Whereas the Americans pay directly for health care.
Well, what's it called here in UK, Colin? It's healthcare is free at the point of delivery.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas in US, you pay for healthcare at the time of need of the service.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean that's a prime example we say that. But no, actually, healthcare isn't free in this country, because you pay taxes for it, you pay national insurance for it. So, but that again, that's
and
a whole thing.
National insurance is like 9% of my monthly income or something like that.
Yeah, but another thing is one of the things they're doing there, for example, is something which is very similar, in fact, thinking about it, to the first couple of Discworld books, where Two-Flower brings in the idea of insurance, and where she do it in the Moonies of Harsh Mistress in particular, they don't. It's not only it's literally treated as a gamble. You're betting that you're not going to need it, so you don't. If you think something's going to happen to you, then you bet. It's literally treated like that. You pay more than you bet, and you're going to get it back if you need it. If you don't, you lose the bet. That's literally how it's treated. A different way of looking at these things. Yeah, I mean, it's again, as I said, there's a lot of things in there which make you think. You don't necessarily have to like them. You may think, and you may go, no, that doesn't work. But then you go, well, wait a minute, why doesn't it work? It makes you think. It doesn't necessarily persuade you,
right?
But it makes you think it through.
Yeah, and there is a such thing as a negative argument to kind of provoke a positive argument, which is an X factor at current. So you present a harsh argument from the beginning. And so the discussion can go, well, we don't like that. We don't like that. We don't like that. Oh, okay. Well, continue telling me what you don't like, and maybe we can display something that's good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's an interesting. I mean, there's a lot of interesting ideas. So one thing I think that science fiction can do that no other genre can do,
right? Is because of the science part.
Yeah, and is present ideas and things from a different point of view. I mean, one of the things that, in particular, when Valentine Smith comes back in comes back from Mars in my brain's completely, utterly.
Oh, Stranger from a Strange
Stranger,
Land.
yeah, the different Stranger. He's looking. He has an outsider's view of human culture, which is something which is very difficult for most people to actually do. You've got to literally, I mean, Heinlein was able to stand outside and look at human culture, at the human cultures that Smith came across with a fresh eye, because we've grown up with our cultures. I mean, we can perhaps look at another culture, but we find it very difficult to critically look at our own culture, because the proverbial idea of the fish not knowing it's in water,
Right.
It's because it's part of us, literally. That's one of the things he did really well. I think he's, so, I mean, there is a reason why he, Clarke, and Asimov were known as the Big Three. I mean,
yeah, they were able to explore concepts inside of a story without it becoming a dissertation on the subject.
Yeah, I mean, like Smith and Burroughs, they were there at the beginning or at the early stages, so they didn't have much competition either at the time or that they were pushing it or behind them. They were, but not nothing against them and nothing against modern authors, but at the time.
I think they were also served by the fact there was no such thing as social media back then.
Yeah.
Yes, they got a hate letter, but they were physically handwritten hate letters if people didn't like them. And that took time, and it cost the people doing it money.
Yeah.
So it wasn't worthwhile for them. Today, it costs nothing to just go drown yourself, you Mr. F bleep, 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 bleep.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, they also, I think, they benefited from the times they grew up.
Yeah, I was going to say that at one point in our early history, and this is pretty much across the world, there was a sense of respect of the adventurer, of the militant, of the political leader, of the social leader, of the churchgoer. I mean, we had respect for these people because we saw on the face of it that it wasn't an easy thing to do. But in the modern day, it's very difficult to see how anybody got their power. But back then, you could see it right on the face of it.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you gentlemen, around what time did the socialization of medicine happen in England? What time period was that occurring in? Because was Heinlein actually discussing it in his science fiction in real time?
The NHS came into existence just after World War II.
Okay, so we could speculate that have spacesuit will travel or the moon is a harsh mistress, that discussion of an alternate form of insurance guarantee
maybe
was
possibly
openly being discussed. Like, did Britain make the correct decision? The US said no, they didn't.
Possibly. But what I was thinking more was the case is that, as I said, they didn't have many contemporaries, and they didn't have many half generation before them, but also they were coming out of an era where you had pulp magazines, you had weekly, monthly magazines, you had your Amazing, you had your
Astounding Science,
Astounding, etc. You had Campbell doing you had Campbell and Gernsback practically inventing the idea of serialized stories in magazines and this sort of thing. And you also had the certainly later on in their careers, you had the expansion of technology and science and interest that came after the Second World War. I mean, we were discussing earlier on what we've seen about that Clarke and Heinlein in particular were being interviewed about the space race. I remember that vaguely, very, very vaguely. I mean, I remember sort of seeing Arthur Clarke being on TV talking about the moon landings and about the space race. I don't remember Heinlein, but I think Heinlein was probably more of an American because he was obviously more famous in America, perhaps. I just don't remember seeing him.
Yeah,
but
I just recently
had that
watched
from as well.
A broadcast that was being simulcast from the East Coast and the West Coast in the United States. And Walter Cronkite had Arthur C. Clarke as the expert because Walter Cronkite was the newscaster.
Yeah.
And on the West Coast, they had another interviewer with Robert Heinlein speaking from his local vicinity in California.
I think I've seen clips of that.
And it's interesting to see the candor of the two gentlemen. Heinlein is all pomp and ceremony, and Clarke is classic reserved British attitude. It is fascinating, and the interviews actually take place between the time that the capsule is landed. They are going to wait a certain time period for these guys to get some rest and maybe take some food in and stuff, and they're about to open up the hatch on the moon for the first touchdown, for the first physical touchdown on the moon. So it's fascinating to see these guys literally at the hinge point of history. And both of them are going on saying, this is probably the most historic event we've witnessed since the birth of language, which I think is a little extreme, but at least since the birth of the Gutenberg press.
I would say it's probably the most significant event witnessed by so many people.
Probably.
And of course, as we all know, of course, that's when we all turned on the silence and murdered the silence because of that message that no one can ever remember, because as soon as you turn away, you forget it.
Right.
But sorry, that's bringing Doctor Who into Ireland, which probably shouldn't do.
Well, they do mention that almost exact colloquialism, that exact notion. That's, you could put your finger on it, but by the time you raise your finger, it's been a few seconds. You forget, like, why did I even put my finger down? Oh, yeah, that's right. It was the moon landing.
Yeah.
It's we get so distracted by our world and our personal lives. It's certainly what makes us human, but at the same time, it also reminds us that we're still animals.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but they did. I mean, that's the other thing is they did is like, I mean, I think the only other people I can possibly think that the only person I can do for something is Carl Sagan, who went on and wrote science fiction. They were scientists themselves. Clarke in particular, they were scientists. They were scientifically aware, and they wrote their science fiction for science. They had the science, the knowledge to back up their stories. The rest of it there as well.
Right.
Hence the word science fiction.
Yeah.
Because it used to contain enough science that whatever fiction you put to it worked.
Yeah.
So even if you take it from the Star Trek or heck, even Princesses of Mars, teleportation, it is possible. We just haven't figured out how to keep the energy and all of that just yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, because there's a difference. That's why I say a lot of them wrote, a lot of the time they wrote hard science, or they wrote ideas like, as I said, I mean, Heinlein's first future history novel, the first I think when he wrote was, no, I don't think it's By His Boots. Heinlein, though, Heinlein, I can definitely, By His Bootstraps was a Heinlein one, I think. And that is the book I can identify why I hate the idea of the Time Lords being able to regenerate cross gender. And I know exactly why, because there's an old Heinlein, I say it's By His Bootstraps. And basically the character starts off as a male. he then becomes female, fully functional female. And there's a time traveling and some. Basically, he is quite literally his own mother and his own father.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But that is why I hate the idea of Time Lords being able to regenerate cross gender, because especially Cinemaster, but that's one of the reasons, I think, because it's got far too many complications. If you could do that and you can travel in time and meet yourself and not know that you're meeting yourself. But there's so many different, but as I said, there are just so many things that Heinlein came up with. He wrote, I think, 2 or 3 different stories about people going to the moon before the Apollo missions. Mm-hmm. Destination Moon, I think Rocket Ship Galileo was as well. There's several actual movies back in the 50s and the 60s based on Heinlein novels.
Yes.
And they were private enterprise. They weren't national. They were literally private enterprise, so they weren't government. A lot of these things he has are not so much anti-government, but again, very much government shouldn't be involved any more than necessary. There's some great ideas in the end in the start of, again, Time Enough for Love, where you start off. They've actually come up with there's Methuselah's Children. The basic storyline is that the secret of the Howard families has been discovered, but it's been misunderstood. People think that they're allowed to, that they are keeping the secret of immortality or not, or long life, etc. They're not. But basically, what happens is, because of government involvement, all the Howard families are these groups that basically, I said, they've been a bit of eugenics inbreeding. They've got a history of longevity, naturally, so not connected to sort of environmental factors. So one of the things they mentioned, for example, is good teeth, but without environmental like fluoride in the water or whatever, or natural fluoride or whatever. And basically, they pack these all onto a ship and they nick this. They nick this spaceship. They go off into space. They have some adventures. They lose people. There's some quite intriguing. But then they come back to Earth, and they discover that Earth has found out their secrets. They haven't, because there are no secrets to find. What they've done is they developed technologies and biologies to extend life, to replace blood and all this sort of thing. And then you get, which is one of the reasons why you get, first time we come across Lazarus in Time Enough for Love, he's dying and he's pissed off because they dragged him out of a flop house and they've revitalized him. They're giving him rejuvenation treatment, and he's pissed off about it because he said he was quietly dying. But once he's been rejuvenated, he doesn't want to, doesn't want to die anymore. Interesting ideas like this. That they then again, they follow it through. They follow the logic through. But then you get time travel. He goes back, and as I said, in the yes, he falls. He gets to Oedipal with his mum at one point, and this is where these things where they reckon that somehow it's not going to be dangerous for them to get jiggy. Let's just say, and they bring her forward. They bring his. Oh, it's, as I said. it's not Cat Who Walks the Walls. You mentioned it earlier, Stephen. One of his very later ones is some very very out there ideas, shall we say, he comes up with.
Yeah, some of the later books. Well, he was in competition at that point with Heinlein, with Philip K. Dick, and some of the other more contemporary authors.
Yeah.
So his stories needed to get a little more philosophical, I guess, more than actual science fiction. And that's when science fiction kind of took a turn. I blame Philip K. Dick for a lot of that, but became more mental construct than actual science fiction construct.
Yeah. But I mean, the reason I subtitled this as The History of the Future, Heinlein, I think I mentioned this before, I realised I hadn't pressed the go live button. But Heinlein famously started off, he got a big sheet of paper and he literally wrote out 2,000 plus years of history. And a load of his books fit in there. And he was the first person to do that. Doc Smith had done the and Heinlein, I think, was influenced by Smith. But Smith had done, as we were discussing last time, Smith had done the big space opera, which
multi-generational.
Which had which had effectively a future history. But that wasn't what he did. He did the space opera, which happened to take place over generations. What Heinlein did, he sat down and he thought it out, and he thought out his 2,000, 3,000 years future, and he wrote short stories and novels in there. The only other person I think who did anything like that roughly around the time that I can think of off the top of my head would have been Asimov. And he didn't do that. He didn't do that till later in his life, about the 70s, I think, or the 80s. When he came back and connected the robot stories to the Foundation stories, because they were originally not at all connected. You've got the Foundation trilogy. You got the first Foundation trilogy, and you've got the lot of robot short stories. So that's probably the closest, because you've got a lot of his robot short stories that run up to Cage of Steel, etc., to the robot novels. But if we do a stream on Asimov sometime, we can cover that more, because there's some interesting bits to cover there as well.
I remember I was trying to look up the name of the book. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I remember there was another author that did a book which covered 18 generations, 18 evolutionary forms of man after us.
Olaf Stapleton.
Yeah,
Last Three Men.
Yeah. Yep. And that was a future history, and he went tens of thousands of years into the future. Speculating us through an aviation age where nobody owned cars, but they flew around all the time, and then that collapsed, and there are no characters, there's no stories. It's basically just looking at it the way an anthropologist would look at ancient history.
Yeah. But because I think that's what it's. I've not read that yet, but I've got a feeling that he did a couple of those. But I've got a feeling that Stapleton, there's very little. It's literally almost written as a history. There's very little actual dialogue in there. I think it's almost literally written as a history.
Yeah, it is. It is. I've read it, and it's not a character-driven story.
He did another called Star Maker, I think, which was a sort of a semi-sequel to that. I think.
Possibly.
But that's some of that.
Once we got into the 60s and 70s, science fiction started to transform radically.
I mean, that's why I said history. Heinlein wrote the history of the future. So and half his books and a lot of separate ones. I mean, Starship Troopers, for example, Starship Troopers is completely independent. It doesn't fit in his future history at all. I don't think How Spaceship Will Travel does. Star Beast, a lot of them don't.
One of the things I absolutely adore about Starship Troopers, and I'm not familiar enough with the whole catalog of Heinlein to even speculate as to whether or not his contraption, the power suit, shows up ever again in his universe?
Is
it unique to Starship Trooper?
I think as the Starship Troopers one is sort of I can't think of anything else that's
because that item alone, along with Doc E.E. Smith's parasuits, pretty much invented by 1959 all the power suits of Halo, Gundam, Voltron, Robotech,
Warhammer 40K.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about something that he openly discusses in detail in the book as a 5,000-pound powered armor suit. He says that it's not invulnerable, but if it were to go up against some of those tanks from, say, old World War II, he said you could probably it would take 10 of those tanks to take down one of these armored suits.
Okay. Well, the thing is, this is one of the things that that Roughnecks, the TV series, got right, which they did in some of the a little bit better in the animated Starship Troopers movies, but the film didn't get. Is the fact that they parachute from orbit. They jump from orbit in a capsule. The capsule explodes. It's what they call cap troopers.
Yeah, it peels away. It's basically a laminate that atmospherically gets torn up.
Yeah, it peels away, and it's chaff. It peels away, and it's automatically it's reflective. It's more reflective of radar than the suit, so it's chaff. It's radar interference as well.
Yep. Yeah. Because as it comes apart, it looks like debris in the sky.
So again, I mean, obviously he was writing that in 58, 59. So obviously we'd had radar in World War II. Chaff had been invented to get rid of radar, but again, relatively new technology even still then.
The impulse control system where all you got to do is move and the computer does the rest.
The negative feedback, yep.
And the heads up, the advanced heads up display where by moving his jaw across a control panel or chomping down on a few buttons in his mouth guard, in his communication piece, he could basically move through multiple displays, just like in Iron Man, when you see him go from standard field arraignment to combat ready. He could check the vitals of anybody in his command staff, regardless of visibility.
He can click through his comms channels himself, his office, whatever. Yeah.
So I mean,
I'm surprised to this date because I played World of Warcraft way back when you had to not only understand a game that didn't have a Wikipedia page that you could automatically go here, do this, gather this, do this, gather this. This is how many numbers you need.
Right.
When I played World of Warcraft, it was essentially you got a couple of lines of text in the game. In this forest area, there will be a little bit of harpies or something. Go and kill them, and you will get feathers and whatnot. You didn't realize that the feathers might be needed for someone that could do stuff that you couldn't do. You just went in and was like, oh, okay, there's a couple of gold. I'll get more coins.
Right.
And it had that similar progression level from Heinlein and others. It's you may need this knowledge, but you don't know that you need the knowledge until you actually need the knowledge.
Yeah, you don't know what you can need. Yeah.
Yeah, which is why I'm such a massive fan of MacGyver. MacGyver is very extremely simplistic if you boil it down. MacGyver is literally just a kid that had paid attention in the STEM classes at school.
Yeah.
And it's 70s. Interesting you bring him up. I think MacGyver is one of these characters in a Heinlein novel where he's kept all of his knowledge and is confident enough in his decision making to figure out, using the tools at hand, how to repair his spacesuit.
Exactly. I agree 100% on that one.
It's back in the day, and that's why I said that Heinlein and Asimov and Clark are historically relevant, because they lived in a time period where knowledge base, and the ability to apply that knowledge to practical use immediately on the spot using any materials was revered back in those days, because, you know, handy men were handy men to have around.
Yeah. I'm reminded there's another thing that they did in I think it's Space Cadet. I could be wrong where Space Cadet's another one. He's sort of like a proto Starship Troopers.
Yeah, I want to definitely get that one.
Yeah, it's a small. It's a young lad who joins the military, and I think it's Starship Troopers. There's one where they've got a war going on, out there in space, and he comes back, and it's things like how people don't understand things. There's one bit, for example, where he's in. They don't have artificial gravity, so he comes back after his training on moon base or space station, and someone comments about his stance, and he said he's bent over. I think it was because he spends so much time in 0G when he's not standing up straight. And the response is something like, "Well, can't you just practice standing up?" Or I can't remember the details, but it's something like that, which is impractical in 0G or in micro G. And another one is things like they're talking about the aliens have bombarded and taken another planet, and someone says, "Oh, what?" Someone, an old lady asks about her some people she knows. Oh, that planet was taken. The answer to that planet was taken by. There's some really great things again in there where you realise that most people don't realise. Most people don't realise the ins and outs of specific situations. One of my pet peeves is something that was particularly prevalent in the press in the 70s and the 80s in relation to Northern Ireland, was the phrase "shoot to kill." I detest that phrase with a vehemence. What you mean is shoot on sight. Because as anybody who's been trained to use firearms, you go for the center of mass.
Right.
Something that people do. If people don't understand, they don't understand why you can't shoot to wound. Well, for starters, if the bullet goes through and bounces off the pavement, and again, that's the sort of thing that Heinlein covers that the general public don't necessarily understand things because it's outside their experience. It's a specific experience.
Yeah, and we've got the added layer of Hollywood contaminating the argument as well.
Yeah, as I said,
where somebody did, every time I see a cop drama now, I see these guys shooting down the street, and I'm like, they wouldn't be able to just shoot down the street. Well, if they hit somebody, it would be on their ass if they hit somebody.
Yeah, it works because Clint Eastwood and Andrew, the actor that played Garak, it was also in one of the Dirty Harry movies. Andrew,
he played the bad guy.
It works because they're on the same payroll. Why can Clint Eastwood shoot this guy in the leg and then they'll get shot back? Well, because they're on the same payroll. But again, this is something I think that Heinlein actually showed a lot of, where he showed, okay, we've got this is. People don't understand these things because it's outside their general experience. Again, it brings it back to are people, how much do people know, and are people sort of living in a bubble, if you like? They don't understand other people. They don't care to understand other people. They just want to live their own lives. Almost bringing it back to this idea. A great example of that, in fact, I think almost is something that the film of Starship Troopers, I think, does better than the book in a way is when you get Johnny's dad arguing against him joining up. Something that's in the book as well.
Yep.
Well, it's, you don't need it. I'm fine with a oh yeah, but that's a really difficult target shooting like that, Jim. But yeah, but yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing is where they come back and they say, I never needed to be a citizen because again, another thing that I hate. No, sorry, it's not a fascist thing because
I never understood that. It's not a fascist system.
Most people in the Starship Troopers universe are perfectly fine not being capital C citizens. They're fine. They don't have something, they just don't know. They get on with their lives just fine.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, no, you can't stand for anything until you have been honorably discharged. So none of the characters you see in Starship Troopers are in charge of anything politically. Right. You cannot do anything politically until you've been discharged and B, honorably discharged.
Right. You completed your agreement.
You've completed your term, and that term can be extended. It's a 2-year term, which is why. I mean, you get an interesting thing is in the book, which they don't point out in the film from the constraints. There's a book where they're talking about it. Where Johnny's saying about he didn't even notice when the Terran Federation went from a state of peace to a state of emergency to a state of war. He was much more interested in what Sergeant Zim thought of the shining on his shoes and how well his tailoring was good.
Yeah. That was one of my favorite parts on the reread was he's continuously telling us that they don't know squat. They don't know the position they are in the war. They don't know whether or not they're keeping a strategic position. They don't know if whether or not that what they're fighting for is genuinely important to the grand theater of operations. He's just like, I'm fighting, man. I'm feeding myself. I'm keeping my suit ready. I'm making sure the people under my command are ready and on the bounce. And that's about it, kids. I got to catch a few winks before I go back on duty. And that's about it. I need to mention this. FFSI is about to betray us at, it looks like 1:40 in my book. What is it? 6 minutes from now, Alec is going up to do a review of the recent Doctor Who episode.
Well, that'll be interesting because we're on FFSI as well.
Yeah. So,
yeah, you're going to have 2 streams to choose from. I mean, the thing is, this is why I think Starship Troopers would make the ideal proof for Starship Troopers, the ideal format for Starship Troopers outside of a book will be miniseries because there's so many things in there. I mean, they do this as he says, and he looks back and half the trading he doesn't even mention.
Yeah,
which things that he mentions in passing, which would make half a story themselves. When they go lose, when they get dumped in their survival, and then they lose people, and then they get fully kitted up, and they go back in again to find the people that have died on the effect. Pretty much special forces selection,
and
that sort of thing. We've been hijacked.
We have been hijacked. I see that.
We appear to have been hijacked. Bloody Doctor Who. And I was trying to avoid Doctor Who all night.
Yep. It doesn't look like I'm going to be able to escape it, though.
Yeah.
That's hysterical. And here we were worried about broadcasting against it. I guess this is proof that we are quite literally up against the brink here.
God.
Fight
Hello,
the
Master.
man, fight the power.
Why does that sound like the Master's laugh? That's even worse.
I think it's more he's probably fairly in line with Heinlein overall, because it was always not always, but most of the time, the overarching pressure from the leadership or whoever was put in leadership that was pressing down. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. And the character Heinlein built were always designed to be, no, screw you, I'm thinking outside of the box. Everywhere from The Moon is a Harsh Mistress to Stranger in a Strange Land to Starship Troopers to Have Spacesuit Will Travel, it remains true to a concept.
Yeah. His what's interesting about Starship Troopers is that he becomes part of a family, a separate unit of society, and he's not thinking outside the box. He's thinking very, very firmly in the box. That's almost the whole point of the story, is he likes this box. Some may call it a power suit. Some may call it the military. Some may call it the army. Some may call it wartime. But he's perfectly satisfied just polishing his boots and staying inside the box. Yeah. I mean, to me, that's really what's going on in that story. It's not a glorified military action. At no point does he ever glorify his military actions.
Exactly. And this is where I was thinking, it's like, why the fork did Paul Verhoeven not dig in deeper to the story?
Well, he was telling his own story.
I'm happy he didn't, because I love the Starship Troopers, the film.
Mm-hmm.
It is fucking amazing as it is.
Mm-hmm.
But so is the book. But the book and the film literally has nothing to do with each other.
Nope.
But they complement each other in such an amazing fashion.
Yeah.
That imagine today, Rings of Power to Lord of the Rings could have been the same.
Yep.
They could have made this obnoxious Galadriel, these awkward, whatever they are. I don't even have a description for them. But they could have leveraged them and balanced them to each other to complement, hey, this is what the book said. This is what we're playing with. We're not trying to override the other. We're just trying to run down the same track, so to speak.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree. I mean, that's as I said. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, my view of Starship Troopers is it's a perfectly good, perfectly serviceable science fiction action military film. The only problem I have with Starship Troopers, the film, is that Starship Troopers, the book, is probably my favorite book of all time. Yeah, but I can separate them and have them as treat them as two separate things. And there's so many. I mean, the thing is, these days with current technology, not with current culture, so many of Heinlein's books would make really good stories. I mean, the Number of the Beast will make an excellent series, because you've got the basic setting, then you go sliders into another one. You go sliders. Well, you might have slight problems going sliders into Oz and the rest of it, depending upon if there are copyright claims. But Have Spaceship Will Travel, excellent young adult fare.
Have Spaceship Will Travel would probably even translate into like a 1 or 2 season like episode. You could build quite easily extra material around it. You could expand the time at the farm. You could expand the experimentation with the spacesuit, and you could expand the area where it's like, oh, hang on, is this reality or not? When he's suddenly starting to encounter the aliens, and then you could have the last bit of it where he has to encounter the aliens.
Yeah. Moon is a Harsh Mistress, excellent political thriller.
Absolutely. Yes.
You know,
and that is another one you could easily make 3 seasons out of if you wanted to convert
the thing is, you could make them as just just a one-off. Again, you could condense them down into a movie, or you could make them a mini. That they would probably enough in them that you would have to put much filler, if you like, in to actually make them into straight chapter. Unlike, the worst one for me, again, if we do an Asimov one, is the worst one for me was the Foundation series. I was really, really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Now, I suspect that if you have never read Foundation, the Foundation series had some fantastic ideas in it.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, I have read the Foundation books, and they do not. That is one set of books. I mean, the first one in particular does not set itself to a serialized show. That is an anthology. They put so much in. A lot of what they put in was really interesting ideas, but they had to pad it out because there's so little and there's not a lot of action. There's not a lot of speech, certainly in the first couple of books.
Foundation is closer to June.
Yeah.
Well, I will have to commend the recent people that did June.
Yeah. I mean, I've actually
enjoyable.
I've actually liked all of the versions. I think they've each got their strengths and their weaknesses. This is what I said with Heinlein, though. I mean, a lot of them. I say you've got have spacesuit. You've got space cadet, Star Beast, Space Family Stone. You've got so many which could be kids or young adult shows, family shows, and then you move, and then you've got the other ones like Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which is lend itself to a gritty adult, not adult as in X-rated, but adult, an adult grown up, as I say, political thriller. You've got so many of these things that would make, and you could do. You could make an entire season of the Twilight Zones just out of his short stories. Mm-hmm. Same for Asimov. A lot of these things, there's so much that
and many of them they did. Didn't they do iRobot for one of the Outer Limits episodes?
Yeah, Asimov's they did. I'm not sure how many Heinleins on that. But again, so
and
many.
The Martian Chronicles made its first appearance on stage in Los Angeles.
And again, Bradbury, The Martian Chronicles, excellent, really, really good. I enjoyed most of the ones of those that I saw with Rock Hudson. But there's so many. But I mean, the thing is, it's like Heinlein, Asimov. They've all got so much output, such varied output. They've got such, and so much of that has.
Yeah,
because of when it comes.
We need to see a production transformation like we had in the 50s, where we went from studio controls to a dozen different film studios making all kinds of stuff in all kinds of ways, because the landscape of television made it possible for them to tell serials instead of putting them on film in cinemas like they were doing during the 30s and 40s. They could now put them on television. So it opened up a whole other landscape of finance.
Yeah.
We need a rebirth like that. Now that we've got all these streaming services, you would think that they'd be lining up around the block for anybody to be doing these shows. The body of science fiction just from this one author alone could keep a studio busy for decades.
Yeah, it could. It definitely could.
And in all formats too. Television, young kids, older kids, sophisticated sci-fi. You know, it's like this is missing from the media landscape because after Heinlein, and most, in my opinion, because of Philip K. Dick and a lot of guys like him, science fiction shifted into fantasy. And then superheroes got added to science fiction as well. And I'm just like, guys, we barely scratched the surface of what's already out there. You're going to now shift us into a subcategory?
I mean, you're saying, Heinlein, again, obviously, especially she's a subject. With his future history, you know, you've got, given the amount of stuff that's in there, you've got so much. You literally could have a 4-5 season show about his future histories, because you've got the short ones. You've got, you know, a short one here, a short one there, a couple of 3 short stories, connected short stories. Then you stick in the next one, which is a major novel. You have 2 or 3 episodes for brain's gone off. For the first one, the one where the Howard families go flying off. My brain's completely gone. I mentioned it the number of times on here. Then you come back, then you have a couple of that, you know. Then you can do Time Enough for Love as a season on its own. Go back and forth. You can do so much with them. And yet people just don't seem to have either knowledge or imagination, or it doesn't fit people's ideas of what they think people should be seeing.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I need somebody to personally explain it to me, why we have a show like American Horror Story now for how many seasons? 5, 6 seasons now? And we don't have an American sci-fi story where each season is an anthology, is a separate category of science fiction. You know, you have something taking place on Earth, something where the whole cast is all aliens, another one where they're all out in space, another one where they're traveling through time. You know, there's 4 seasons right there. And you use the internal episodes, and the structure of the season is loosely based on tropes and science fiction that was invented during the 40s and 50s. Or you do another one that was from the 60s, you know, and those are your seasons.
Yeah.
And each episode is tributed as inspired by a certain novel by a famous sci-fi author.
Yeah. Yeah. You could do so much more with these things. And yet we get the bland. So we get guys, I think I'm gonna
yes.
We could go on for weeks, but we'll sort of wrap up a little bit now. Folks, obviously we also had something else happened this evening that some people seem to want to talk about. So I'm going to end this one in a couple of minutes. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for Jim for joining me. Thank you guys in the channel, PJ. I'm sure I said Stephen. Mountains of Elysium.
Jacob Ironside.
I saw in there, guys. Hope you all enjoyed. The only thing I can recommend you do is go and read some Heinlein. There's plenty out, various things out there.
There are dozens.
Dozens
of books.
I would definitely recommend the reading of them, because it's quite different from. There are a few adaptations that have been happening from a lot of these authors that we've been talking about, from Clarke to Asimov to Heinlein. There's been adaptations, and you don't even know that they're adaptation unless you've actually read the books.
And unlike modern authors, or no, rephrase it, unlike the modern publishing industry, authors like Heinlein, Asimov, they wrote everything from collections of short stories through to small novels to quite thick, to quite thick novels. So there's something, something you can find to whet your interest, and then you can maybe go on to something more of those ones. You've either got future history where you can actually see, oh, that's interesting, that refers back, or a load of stuff that's just standalones. But I think I'm going to call it there because, as I said, I mean, if you're interested, I'm going to kill this one, but don't go away, guys. Well, unless you came here to escape Doctor Who, because once we've cleared the airways, I think Alex is going to come on and he's champing at the bit. I can probably hear him, even though he's actually muted. And actually, I think I can hear him in real life champing a bit to come on because he generously subjected himself to the last episode of Doctor Who. Well,
I can also hear him from West London.
Yeah.
So the screaming is very loud.
Yeah. So, gents, thank you very much for joining me to discuss probably my favorite author. Tuesday we have on FSI we are doing Iron Sky. Wednesday over on PJ's channel we will be talking Beetlejuice. Okay, no one else said that or have said it 3 times and we know what that happens. Okay, guys, so thank you.
Thank you
thank you very much, guys. And remember, service guarantees citizenship.
Service guarantees citizenship.
Have a good night, folks. And I say, stay tuned if you want to listen to Alex rant and rave, no doubt, about Doctor Who. Good afternoon or good night.
Ciao.
Ciao, everybody.